Now it's time for the last word. Ali Velshi is in for Lawrence tonight. Good evening, Ali.
Rachel, the entire country should be up in arms about your description of what's going on in North Dakota and the voting laws. Thank you for all the detail you went into to explain how many people in North Dakota very legitimately do not have street addresses and may be disenfranchised because of that. You have a great evening, Rachel.
Thanks a lot, Ali. Much appreciated.
All right, I'm Ali Velshi in for Lawrence O'Donnell. A lot to get to tonight, including Congressman Adam Schiff, ranking member in the House Intelligence Committee, who will join me in studio to discuss the United States' relationship with Saudi Arabia and what Donald Trump said last night about possibly firing Robert Mueller after the midterms. That's coming up. But first tonight, NBC News is reporting that Saudi Arabia is discussing a plan to admit that missing Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi was killed after entering the Saudi consulate in Istanbul 13 days ago. But the story, reportedly being prepared by the Saudi government, is raising even more questions, including why it seems to line up with a new theory floated by President Trump today. NBC News spoke with three people who have knowledge of the situation. Quote, according to two of the individuals, the Saudis are putting together an explanation that would absolve Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the putative leader of Saudi Arabia, of responsibility by giving him plausible deniability to say he didn't order the killing and didn't know about it. Such an off-ramp could provide a way for Saudi leadership to save face and explain away their previous insistence that Khashoggi wasn't killed in the consulate. NBC News also reporting tonight. One of those two individuals said he was told by those close to the Saudi leadership that the kingdom will claim that rogue operatives killed Khashoggi during an interrogation or a rendition attempt that went horribly awry. The third individual said that the U.S. government still doesn't know precisely what the explanation the Saudis plan to give, but the Saudis intend to admit culpability. The explanation of an interrogation gone wrong seems to be contradicted by some of what the Turkish government has revealed about the incident, which the New York Times reported, quote, includes signs of deliberate assassination. Among other things, Turkish officials have said an autopsy specialist carrying a bone saw was among 15 Saudi operatives who flew to Istanbul on October 2nd, the day that Mr. Khashoggi disappeared. The president said this tonight about the possibility that Saudi Arabia may be about to admit that Khashoggi was killed in an interrogation gone wrong.
I just saw that. I just don't know. I'm going to have to see what they say. I heard that report, but nobody knows if it's an official report. So far, it's just the rumor of a report coming out.
Speaking to reporters earlier today, the president seemed to indicate he was at least open to, if not outright supportive of the denials of any involvement issued by Saudi Arabia. At the White House this morning, he even seemed to invent a new explanation for the killing: rogue killers.
I just spoke with the King of Saudi Arabia, who denies any knowledge of what took place with regard to, as he said, his Saudi Arabian citizen. He didn't really know. Maybe, I don't want to get into his mind, but it sounded to me like maybe these could have been rogue killers. Who knows?
Okay, so it sounded like the president interpreted that to mean rogue killers. And I'm going to get back to what the president just said about the Saudi Arabian citizen. That's going to be important. The president didn't say what evidence he might have to support the theory that it sounded like, quote, rogue killers. It's also not clear why it seems to so closely match the new story being floated by the Saudis tonight. This is not the first time Donald Trump blamed rogue operatives for something, despite the evidence. Donald Trump's statements today look a lot like his response when Russia's Vladimir Putin was accused of interfering in the 2016 election. Today, it was rogue killers. In 2016, it was rogue hackers.
I mean, it could be Russia, but it could also be China. It could also be lots of other people. It also could be somebody sitting on their bed that weighs 400 pounds, okay?
And that wasn't the only thing President Trump said today that sounded similar to what he said about Putin.
The king firmly denied any knowledge of it. The denial was very strong. It wasn't like there was a question in his mind. The denial was very, very strong.
I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.
I believe that he feels that he and Russia did not meddle in the election.
So as long as your denial is strong and powerful, you're good. Tonight, the president once again may be out of step with the widespread condemnation of the behavior of a foreign government as he continues to resist calls to take action. The president has dispatched Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to Saudi Arabia tonight, saying he instructed him to find out what happened. But he continues to avoid questions on any possible punishment or sanction. And his administration will still attend an investment conference in Saudi Arabia this month, despite scores of sponsors and business leaders pulling out. JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon saying he won't attend, along with the CEO of MasterCard. But Trump Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin is still scheduled to go.
He's going to make that decision. We're going to see who's going. He's got a while to go. You know, it's Friday. He has to know by the end of Friday. And we'll make that decision. We haven't made a decision about going yet, but he's going to make that decision sometime prior to Friday.
Joining us now, Brian Klaas, an assistant professor of global politics at University College London and a columnist for The Washington Post. Joining us as well, Rami Khouri, a senior public policy fellow at the American University of Beirut and a political columnist. He's currently a fellow at Harvard. And Evelyn Farkas, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and a former deputy assistant secretary of defense. She's an MSNBC national security analyst. And let me start with you, Evelyn. This is one of those things where the real world comes up against diplomatic realities. We have not in history taken issue with a lot of the human rights and press freedoms abuses that have been committed in Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia makes us rich and gives us lots of oil, and we do very well by Saudi Arabia. This is now reality that Saudi Arabia, if it admits to culpability in the death of Jamal Khashoggi, is going to put the American government in a difficult position.
Yeah, I think because you have to think of the context right now, Ali. You know, we have really an uptick of these extraterritorial, extrajudicial killings of journalists and others by autocratic leaders. So this joint you mentioned earlier in your segment, you know, Vladimir Putin, he's been killing journalists and others in other countries. If you recall, the latest one in Ukraine actually turned out to be where the journalist was helping the authorities find his assailant. So it was a faked one. But this one is very real. It's happening. It happened in Turkey, although strictly speaking, a Saudi consulate is, I guess, Saudi sovereign territory. But nevertheless, that Saudi citizen went into the consulate, may have been lured in, but in any event, went in there and went to his death. And he was a permanent citizen of the United States, so we bear some responsibility as well. And I just don't think we can stand there and say nothing, because all these autocrats around the world will take only one lesson from this, which is keep on going.
Well,
you know, kill whoever you want to kill.
Dissidents around the world need to fear. He was a U.S. resident. Rami, let me just ask you about this. I want to read you a couple of tweets. One from Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, because to Evelyn's point, if we do nothing, that would be one thing. We seem to be doing more than nothing. We seem to be setting up the argument that the Saudis are going to use here. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut tweeted, "Been hearing the ridiculous rogue killers theory was where the Saudis would go with this. Absolutely extraordinary. They were able to enlist the president of the United States as their PR agent to float it." Rami, you and I talked the other day, and you were worried that the U.S. is complicit with some of these regimes like Saudi Arabia. This is pretty serious, that we seem to be in lockstep with what their messaging about a dead columnist is going to be.
Yeah, there's really three terrible angles to this. One, that the U.S. president seems to be working closely with the Saudi leadership and coming up with this cockamamie story. The second one is that the whole world basically is very critical of what the Saudis apparently have done or what has happened in the Saudi consulate and wants accountability. And the third one, and the more powerful, more frightening and oldest trend, is that the United States has stood by or actively participated in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of innocent civilian Arabs and other nationals all around the Middle East, and in Palestine and Iraq and in Yemen and other places. So the death of Arabs, innocent Arabs, at the hands of their own governments, or wars by Arabs aided by the United States, that is something that is very much in keeping with the American legacy in the Middle East. It just becomes so much more gruesome when it is publicly manipulated by the American president in real time, as seems to be happening now. So either there's accountability or there's no accountability. We live in the jungle or we live in the rule of law. The American president seems to say we like the jungle.
Right. We at least would like to pretend that we live in the rule of law. But, Rami, your point is well taken, that while we are concentrated on the story of Jamal, whom you know, I know that you and he have had close contact, that this is a bigger story. This is a story about whether we're coming down on the side of right or wrong. Brian Klaas, Jamal Khashoggi was not the greatest critic of Saudi Arabia. In fact, he was supportive in instances of Mohammed bin Salman in some of the things that he was doing. He was critical on some fronts, but he identified as a Saudi. He wanted Saudi Arabia to move forward. Why him? Why would they want him so badly?
Well, I think Jamal threatened them because he was one of them. And so critiques from internal sources and people who are actually part of the Saudi establishment are much more dangerous because they're people that Saudis listen to. His columns were written in Arabic, right? So the thing that I think is really insidious about this is they identified him as a target. And then they looked at who's in the White House. And I think the Saudis made a strategic calculation here. They basically calculated that Trump's dictator worship, his hatred for the press, in particular the Washington Post, and his deep financial ties to the Saudis going back several decades meant that they could kill this guy in the Saudi consulate and not have a harsh reaction from the American president.
They may have miscalculated in this instance only because of the public reaction to it, but they seem to have been all right in their calculation of Trump doing it.
They've been totally right about how Trump would behave. I mean, he's been downplaying this repeatedly, highlighting that he's not actually a U.S. citizen, as though we shouldn't care about him.
Right, he was a U.S.
resident.
Even though
he's got two children.
Living on our borders.
And he's got two children who are U.S. citizens, and he writes for one of the major American newspapers. And it's absolutely incumbent on Washington to push back hard on Trump that we actually have to have a moral assertion of leadership in this world, and that Jamal Khashoggi's death needs to be a wake-up call that the insidious bipartisan stain that the Saudi relationship has been in Washington needs to end soon.
Rami, there is a complicating factor here. America has been in bed with the Saudis for some time, and as you pointed out, with a number of oppressive regimes. But this particular president seems to have uniquely close ties to the Saudi regime, including Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law. He's got financial ties to the Saudis. And when confronted with this first, Donald Trump used the argument that, look, they buy military equipment from us. They'd buy it from the Russians or they'd buy it from the Chinese. These financial relationships with some of these countries are what drive our policy toward them. And in moments like this, when the pressure is on, drive our responses to inhumane actions. This is being laid bare now.
I think so. And there's another element to that besides the material bilateral financial element. The United States has chosen Saudi Arabia to be the linchpin of its regional policy to bring together a group of countries, Arabs, Israelis, and others, against Iran, to push back Iran. And therefore, it is absolutely critical for Trump to maintain that fiction that Saudi Arabia can actually rally a lot of countries and armies and fight terrorism and push back Iran and work with the Israelis for a peace plan in Palestine and Israel. And all of this is fantasy. This is stuff that Trump dreams about when he's golfing, I think. It has nothing to do with the reality in the Middle East. I mean, the Saudi king basically went against the policy that Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, his son, had about trying to work with the Israelis for this nutty peace plan that Jared Kushner came up with. So there's this bigger regional imperative for Trump to hold on to the Saudis as an important player. And of course, they're not an important player. Every foreign policy move that Saudi Arabia has made under Mohammed bin Salman in the last 2.5 years has not only been a failure, but has been counterproductive and has hurt the Saudis in so many ways. And there's only a few countries in the world who support Saudi Arabia, and those are countries that are dependent on it financially, mostly small Arab countries and Egypt and one or two others. So, the Saudis are a really a bad partner to choose as the linchpin of your regional political strategy. And Trump is a pretty low integrity president, and therefore he carries out these policies that are certainly bound to fail.
Evelyn Farkas, when asked about this by Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes last night, this is what the president said.
Let's say they did. What are your options? Would you consider imposing sanctions as a bipartisan group of senators have proposed?
Well, it depends on what the sanction is. I'll give you an example. They are ordering military equipment. Everybody in the world wanted that order. Russia wanted it. China wanted it. We wanted it. We got it.
So would you cut that off?
Well, I tell you what I don't want to do. Boeing, Lockheed, Raytheon, all these I don't want to hurt jobs. I don't want to lose an order like that.
Evelyn, you were a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. That is the description of the military-industrial complex. It was a strange argument. When Lesley Stahl said, what will you do if our allies, the Saudis, are found to be responsible for this, Donald Trump started listing defense companies and their contracts and the jobs that those companies provide Americans.
Right. And here's the thing. Whatever President Trump wants to do with regard to sanctions on Saudi Arabia, it's not going to be up to him. It's going to be up to Congress. And Congress was pretty clear in a bipartisan fashion. You saw on all the television shows on Sunday, the senators saying, and representatives saying, we're going to take action. We are going to sanction Saudi Arabia already right now, the arms sales that were under discussion. And by the way, they don't add up to $110 billion.
No,
the Saudis just let another one go. They let another deadline go on an air defense system. You know, these are these are wish lists they come up with under the Obama administration. I'm sure you're aware. We also had about $115 billion wish list, but the Saudis never buy everything on the wish list, and they're not going to now. And whether they want to or not, Congress already has put on hold a bunch of the things that they wanted to buy. Those arms, the companies also are looking closely. Of course, they want to make business deals, but they don't want to be complicit in human rights violations or aiding and abetting human rights violations. There's the whole issue of Yemen and then Syria. So already, even before this, there was a lot of trouble on Capitol Hill, primarily over Yemen and the way that the Saudis have used their air forces indiscriminately, killing, as you know, a school bus full of children in the summer. And that was just one example of many of these. So,
and we provide many of those bombs, and we refuel those planes mid-air. So if you're not happy about what's going on in Yemen, you need to talk to your congressman. All right, thanks to the three of you, Evelyn Farkas, Rami Khouri, and Brian Klaas. Coming up, President Trump wants to remind you that he's the president and that he's not a baby. That and some other odd answers he gave in a rare interview. And President Trump is staying on the campaign trail, hoping to stop Democrats from taking the House of Representatives. He won't like the Democrats' agenda if they do succeed. Congressman Adam Schiff joins me next. President Trump sat down this weekend for what's becoming an increasingly rare event, a non-Fox News, non-conservative interviewer asking him questions in a full-length interview. This one on 60 Minutes. Trump was the same man he's always been. The president continued his sympathy for autocrats and dictators while seeming to suggest that our allies aren't actually our allies, starting with this remark about Kim Jong-un.
He's a bad guy.
Look, let it be whatever it is. I get along with him really well. I have a good energy with him. I have a good chemistry with him.
Do you agree that Vladimir Putin is involved in assassinations, in poisonings?
Probably he is, yeah, probably. I mean, I don't...
Probably?
Probably, but I rely on them. It's not in our country.
Okay, you have also slapped some tariffs on our allies.
Well, I mean, what's an ally? We have wonderful relationships with a lot of people, but nobody treats us much worse than the European Union.
Really? Well, Trump said he doesn't trust his own staff, especially, it seems, Defense Secretary Jim Mattis.
The First Lady,
yes,
Melania, she said that there are still people in the White House that she doesn't trust and that you shouldn't trust.
I feel the same way. I don't trust everybody in the White House, I'll be honest with you.
Is it true, General Mattis said to you, the reason for NATO and the reason for all these alliances is to prevent World War III?
No, it's not true. Frankly, I like General Mattis. I think I know more about it than he does.
Wow. All right. President Trump even denied that he mocked Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, who testified that she was sexually assaulted by Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. And he declared that it doesn't matter whether Dr. Ford was telling the truth.
You mimicked her.
Had I not made that speech, we would not have won.
Why did you have to make fun of her?
I didn't really make fun.
Do you think
there are those that think she shouldn't have been.
Do you think you treated her with great respect?
I think so, yeah, I did.
But you seem to be saying that she lied.
You know what? I'm not going to get into it because we won. It doesn't matter. Well, we won.
Well, the most revealing moment may be this exchange with Lesley Stahl, which came at the end of a question about Trump administration's family separation policy.
I'm just telling you that you treated me much differently on the subject.
I disagree, but I don't want to have that fight with you.
Hey,
all right,
it's
we'll
okay.
have another fight with you.
Leslie, it's okay. In the meantime, I'm president and you're not.
I'm president and you're not. Trump really is the same man he's always been. Turns out when he was pressed on policy issues during a Time magazine interview in 2017, he said the same thing to that reporter. I can't be doing so badly because I'm president and you're not. Joining us now, Daniel Dale, Washington bureau chief at the Toronto Star, Jason Johnson, politics editor at TheRoot.com, and an MSNBC contributor. Welcome to both of you. Daniel Dale, you make a business out of chronicling the unusual things that Donald Trump says. What do you make of that interview?
Well, as you said, he was the same man. He was hugely dishonest. He was evasive. He found a way to write off some of Putin's nefarious activities, even as he was being challenged about why he has a tendency to do so. And when he was challenged at all, he resorted to anger and to pettiness. And so these opportunities are very rare when he subjects himself to any kind of critical questioning. And I think on the rare occasions where he does so, he reveals things about his personality that I think his advisors would prefer to keep concealed.
Jason, what do you think he does it for, though? Because he's not going to agree with anything Leslie Stahl says. He seems to relish the fight. Why even do these things? Because every second night there seems to be a MAGA rally somewhere in the country. And in between that, he deals with things like hurricane relief or dealing with the fact that the Saudis may have killed an American resident in the consulate, the embassy in Istanbul. Why does he even do these kinds of interviews?
Well, Ollie, he does them because the president can't be convinced that he's terrible at it. And every time, whether it was Lester Holt, whether it was Leslie Stahl, every time he does these interviews, he's like the guy under the camera and the closer. Like, he always looks so nervous and he starts lying and fumbling around and attacking and being aggressive. I mean, none of these interviews give any functional information about how our government works, and they only provide insight, increased insight, as if we didn't know, that he is a petty, venal, racist, misogynistic man who is clearly beyond his gourd when it comes to trying to run the country. But he doesn't believe that about himself, at least for the hour or so it takes him to get into these interviews. But that's the whole point. I mean, he does it because he's an egomaniac, and he desperately thinks that one day he's going to do an interview where he doesn't come off as a proto-dictator monster. And that's never going to happen.
Daniel Dale, he said a lot of interesting things that we didn't actually run here. One of them was a conversation, we heard a little bit about it, about Jim Mattis and what he thinks about Jim Mattis. He has always been very big on Mattis. We've heard lately that relationship may be starting to sour as Mattis speaks truth to him. Here's a little more of what he told Leslie Stahl.
What about General Mattis? Is he going to leave?
Well, I don't know. He hasn't told me that. I have a very good relationship with him. It could be that he is. I think he's sort of a Democrat, if you want to know the truth.
The president didn't fully explain what that exactly means. He's sort of a Democrat, if you want to know the truth.
He did not. I think there are two possibilities here. One is that because Mattis is a rare figure in his orbit who does push back on his ideas, on his proposals, that he therefore thinks that Mattis is essentially part of the opposition. We know there are figures within the administration, who clash with Mattis themselves, and it's possible that they've persuaded Trump that Mattis is not really on his team. I think another possibility, though, is that Trump is sort of preparing the spin, doing some pre-spin for Mattis' eventual departure. We know that with numerous figures in his orbit, when they leave, he makes them sort of an unperson. Michael Cohen, different circumstances, but I had a lot of lawyers. Steve Bannon, he came onto the campaign very late, and so when they're leaving or about to leave, Trump tries to minimize their importance. And I think by calling Mattis a Democrat, he's telling his base, who needs this guy anyway?
Jason, it's been some months where we've not seen the sort of results from North Korea that the president seems to want to convince the world he's had. He seems to have a completely different impression about how his summit with Kim Jong-un went and what it resulted in. Leslie Stahl asked him a bit more about why he seems to favor Kim Jong-un these days, the man he used to call Little Rocket Man. Here's that exchange.
I want to read you his resume, okay? He presides over a cruel kingdom of repression, gulags, starvation, reports that he had his half-brother assassinated, slave labor, public executions. This is a guy you love.
I know all these things. I mean, I'm not a baby. I know all these things.
Why do you...
I don't know what part of that stood out to you, Jason, the litany of things that Kim Jong-un did or the quick response, I'm not a baby.
The I'm not a baby got me first, because clearly the giant balloon babies are getting to the president, that he has said that multiple times throughout this interview, unprompted, although I don't know what kind of prompt makes you say I'm not a baby. But this is what I've always thought was important about North Korea. The president has embraced a cruel dictator. And the one thing that he could actually say is that his intervention in North Korea has probably sped up the peace process between the North and the South. And he could try and claim some semblance of credit for that, because that is good for the entire region. But instead, he insists on demanding or claiming that he has led to a denuclearization of the North, and that hasn't happened. In fact, North Korea has pretty much spat in our faces on that main request, and he refuses to listen to the actual facts on the ground. But that's par for the course with this president, and no matter what logic he's faced with, he's still going to live in his own fantasy world, at least until the next time you ask him the question.
Daniel, one of the things that are interesting is we're listening to this interview and clips from it, but what the president is doing and what has been announced again tonight is that he will have, I think on Monday, another rally in Houston. He really is having a rally every 2 or 3 nights now, and you're getting a lot more of Donald Trump unfiltered. It seems the staff doesn't bother attempting to control him anymore or control the message. We don't hear about John Kelly instructing him on how to do things anymore. This seems to be Donald Trump, campaign Trump. Is this, what are we seeing now?
Yeah, we're seeing what Kellyanne Conway called Donald Trump in full. And I think this is largely because the staff knows that there's no point. He wants to do this. He's going to do it. They can't win. They prepare speeches for him, but he doesn't read them. I think he's been doing somewhat better in recent weeks as the midterm has approached at staying on script, doing the kinds of attacks on local Democratic candidates in the states he goes to. That's what his advisors and the local campaigns want him to do. But then he gets, exercised about something, or he hasn't spoken in 12 hours and he needs to get something off his chest, and he does what he does. And so these lies are filled with, these rallies are filled with lies. They're filled with hyperbole. They're filled with pettiness. But this is what a lot of his base wants. And it's no coincidence that he's doing these rallies in red states where Democrats, especially Senate candidates, are endangered. He knows that by being Trump, he can motivate a certain segment of the electorate.
And Jason, does this work in the days up to the midterm elections? The president said that he's the one he claims that he got everybody worked up, and he narrowed this enthusiasm gap with Republicans by coming out in full-throated defense of Brett Kavanaugh. Is this a continuation of that?
Right. No, I don't think that the president ended up being the big difference maker with Brett Kavanaugh. That was going to happen anyway. It's like me trying to take credit for good weather in D.C. But I will say this. When it comes to the campaign trail, speaking to a Republican pollster earlier today, the president has a unique ability to raise the passion and the blood pressure of everyone around him. He is a force of nature. He gets Republicans excited. He gets Democrats furious. So he is effective to bring out in these campaigns, especially in these red states where you have to gin up support for Republicans who are running for Senate. I don't know necessarily that he does it well in blue states. I don't know if I would want him coming down and campaigning for me in Florida, because in any place outside of a red state, the negative backlash to Trump's appearance will probably overcome any of the positives of turning out a shrinking Republican base.
All right. Thanks to you two for helping me analyze this tonight. My fellow Torontonian Daniel Dale and Jason Johnson. Thanks to both of you. Up next, what are Democrats' plans if they manage to reclaim power in the House of Representatives? Congressman Adam Schiff has his agenda ready. He'll join us next. With 22 days until the midterm elections, Democrats are preparing to investigate Donald Trump and his administration should they flip the House. Democrats on committees ranging from intelligence to judiciary to oversight are prioritizing where to begin scrutinizing the president's conduct. In August, Axios obtained a spreadsheet circulating among Republicans that previewed a number of investigations they feared Democrats could launch if Democrats take control of the House. Scandals that Republicans have refused to investigate. To name a few, the list includes President Trump's tax returns, the Trump family businesses, Trump's dealings with Russia, the payment to Stormy Daniels, James Comey's firing, the travel ban, family separation policies, hurricane response in Puerto Rico, election security and hacking, and White House security clearances. In a Washington Post op-ed, top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, writes that this Republican-controlled Congress has surrendered its oversight responsibilities. The Republican Congress has not only failed to assert itself and review or investigate the conduct of the executive, worse, it's also been complicit in some of the president's most egregious attacks on our democratic institutions. It's clear that we need a new majority that's willing to hold this administration accountable. So what exactly will Democrats do if they win in November? Joining us now is Congressman Adam Schiff, ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, good to see you in person. We normally see you remotely.
Yes, good to be with you.
The Republicans circulated this list, ostensibly to scare themselves into saying, don't even think about losing the midterm elections because this is what's going to happen if Democrats come in. How accurate is that list of things that the Democrats are going to want to do, and how will Democrats prioritize those things?
Well, you know, it's only accurate in the sense that these are some of the issues that the Republican Congress has been completely unwilling to look into. If you look at the committee with the most broad oversight responsibility, government reform and oversight, that committee chaired by Trey Gowdy, the guy that brought us the endless Benghazi investigations, only recently did he issue even a single subpoena with 1 foot out the door, basically, during the entire Trump administration. They only found it worthy of 1 subpoena.
Right.
So it's been a complete abdication. But what that list doesn't convey is we are going to have to ruthlessly prioritize because there is so much that has gone wrong and so much worthy of a close examination. Our first priority is going to be putting forward a positive agenda, but where we do oversight, we're going to have to really prioritize the most important matters first.
You know, we keep on going out to Americans, many of whom are not as concerned about Russia, but they are concerned about the fact that we've got under 4% unemployment, and yet middle-class wages have not increased. They're very worried about health care. And if they're casting their ballot in November, for many Americans, it's going to be, can you improve those situations for me?
That is exactly right. And this is, I think, both why, on the one hand, our top priority has to be answering those tough economic questions, putting forward a positive agenda for the half of the country that is, yes, they're working, but they're not earning enough to get by or put anything away for retirement. We're in an economy which I think, because of globalization and automation, is going to be as disruptive as the Industrial Revolution. And we have to be offering solutions to people that allow them to keep their health care, that allow them to put away money for their retirement. But also, we need to do the oversight about why this isn't happening, why this tax giveaway, and we just saw the deficit balloon today as a result, why this isn't going to help.
No hearings on that either.
No hearings on that at all. Of course not. No hearings on that.
No hearings on health care.
One of the things that, you know, for example, Elijah Cummings, who will be the chair if we're successful in the midterms of the Government Oversight Committee, he wants to look into the cost of prescription drugs and what can we do to help people meet those key medical costs. These, I think, are going to be enormously important priorities because if we want to win back some of those voters that voted for Donald Trump because they'd given up all hope that the more conventional politicians were going to do anything about it, well, he hasn't done anything to improve their lot, but we have to be offering solutions that will.
One of the interesting things he said to Lesley Stahl in that 60 Minutes interview was about the Mueller investigation. She asked him to make a pledge to not get rid of Mueller. Let's listen to that.
Will you pledge that you will not shut down the Mueller investigation?
Well, I don't pledge anything, but I will tell you, I have no intention of doing that. I think it's a very unfair investigation because there was no collusion of any kind.
But you won't
pledge? There is no collusion. I don't want to pledge. Why should I pledge to you? If I pledge, I'll pledge. I don't have to pledge to you, but I have no intention of doing it.
What do you read out of that?
Well, first of all, even if he did pledge, one thing we've learned from President Trump, you can't rely on his word anyway. But he clearly wants to give himself the operating room, the maneuvering room, where he could get rid of Mueller, or he could get rid of Rod Rosenstein, or he can push Jeff Sessions out the door. He was similarly cagey about Jeff Sessions' future. The president may conclude, along with his legal advisors, that rather than facing the blowback that would be occasioned by getting rid of Bob Mueller, he will get rid of Jeff Sessions and replace him with some lackey, some Roy Cohn, somebody who will simply do his bidding and privately kneecap Bob Mueller rather than overtly fire him. It's long past time, I think, for the Congress to do something about this to protect the integrity of the investigation. It is no longer tenable for the Mitch McConnells of the world to say, well, we can't imagine that the president would actually interfere. He interferes on a daily basis, trying to get documents from the Justice Department for his legal team that he has no right to see. as someone who may be implicated in that investigation.
And you have written that it is Congress has got to say, you've written in your op-ed, we must do what the supine Republican Congress has failed to do over the past 2 years, restore Congress as an equal branch and check the ambition of an imperial and erratic president. If the Democrats take the House, you may be the chair of the Intel Committee, a committee that didn't do what it was supposed to do in the Russia investigation, in the investigation into Russian involvement into the election. There are a lot of Americans who are hoping that at least that committee will get something done.
And we will. And I think among the most important business that hasn't been done at all, investigation that hasn't been done at all, is the issue of were the Russians laundering money through the Trump Organization? Is that leverage that the Russians may have over the President of the United States? I think it's negligent not to answer that question and be able to tell the American people, yes, it's true, or no, it isn't. But if that is the explanation for that otherwise inexplicable conduct in Helsinki, in which he sides with Putin over his own intelligence agencies, we need to know about it to protect the country. And so I would hope in the Intel Committee we can restore credibility with the intelligence agencies for our committee. I would hope we can restore comity within the committee. But I would also hope that we do a credible and nonpartisan investigation of those things that could be a threat to the country.
Congressman, good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Good to see you.
Congressman Adam Schiff is the ranking member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Coming up, new polls about Democratic outlook for the House of Representatives and a look at what happens if Democratic turnout isn't as big as Democrats hope. We are just 22 days out from the midterm elections, and signs continue to suggest that Democrats have a strong chance of reclaiming control of the House of Representatives this November. A new ABC Washington Post poll gives Democrats a 13-point lead over Republicans on the generic congressional ballot. That same poll also shows a major increase in voter enthusiasm since the last midterm election, driven largely by Democrats and independents. Democrats are also heading into the final 3 weeks of the campaign season with a major cash advantage over Republicans. According to Politico, Republicans in competitive districts have reserved around $60 million for TV advertising during the final weeks of the campaign. Democrats, by contrast, have reserved around $109 million for those same races. Now, that cash disparity has led Republicans to embrace a new strategy, triage. The New York Times reports that the national Republican groups have started to pull millions of dollars away from Republican candidates who have fallen substantially behind in once competitive races and are instead trying to consolidate resources in just around 24 competitive districts. Now, that might seem like a sign that national Republicans are giving up when it comes to winning the House of Representatives. But given their position, the new strategy might not be such a bad idea. Remember, Democrats need to win a total of 23 seats in order to win a majority in the House. Anything short of that, and the balance of power remains the same. So Republicans can stand to lose a few seats if it means keeping their majority. And that same math is weighing on Democrats as they work to turn their voters out in midterms. An analysis from CBS News and YouGov shows that in a high turnout scenario, Democrats could end up with as many as 235 of the 435 seats in Congress, well above what they need for a majority. But in a low turnout scenario, check this out. Democrats would end up with just 217 seats, more than they currently hold, but 1 seat shy of a majority. So are Democrats doing enough to prevent that scenario in these crucial last 3 weeks? Jason Johnson and Daniel Dale will help me sort that out after this. All right, we're 3 weeks away from the midterm elections, and Democrats need to mobilize voters to take back control of the House. Senator Kamala Harris tweeted today, a new poll shows that if voter turnout is low on November 6th, Republicans will hold on to the House by just 1 seat. This is why it's so critical. We talk to our friends, we talk to our neighbors, and we get everyone we know out to vote in 22 days to elect Democrats. Daniel Dale and Jason Johnson are back with us. Jason, we saw a big enthusiasm gap for quite a while. We saw Democrats take the lead on that front, not just in the polls, but in the number of people who said that they were looking forward to these midterm elections and they thought they were important and that they would go out and vote. That has narrowed. What do you attribute that to?
I attribute it to Republicans actually waking up. They were so tired of winning so much under Trump that they'd kind of gone to sleep. But the Kavanaugh race has really galvanized them. So I was expecting that enthusiasm gap between the two parties to diminish. But the Democrats are much more enthusiastic at the lower state level, at the statewide level, at the national level. There really is no comparison if you look at how people are feeling across the country. The challenge is not getting people to turn out to vote, in all honesty. I think that's not going to be too much of an issue for Democrats, whether you're talking about Texas or Maryland or Florida. The issue is going to be stopping voter suppression by Republicans. And that's something where Perez and the DNC need to be actively involved. It can't just fall on the shoulders of Democratic statewide candidates to fight all these legal battles to make sure that Democrats can actually get out to vote.
Right. And part of the problem with voter suppression, Daniel, is that when there are enough stories about this, we see it. We're talking a lot about Georgia. We're talking about North Dakota, in which the Supreme Court has upheld a law that says that if you don't have an address on your identification, you can't vote. That's a change from the primaries where many Native Americans don't have physical addresses because they have P.O. boxes. The point is, if enough people are convinced that there's voter suppression out there, they don't necessarily want to fight that system, and they stay home and don't vote.
Yeah, it's a double whammy. And so we know that many Republicans in a number of states have made a longstanding effort to try to dissuade or prevent non-white voters from being able to go to the polls, and they've been aided by the Supreme Court and what it's allowed to be done under the Voting Rights Act. And then I think you're right. The fact that is happening and people read and hear that that's happening convinces some African Americans, Hispanics, and others that it doesn't, their vote, won't matter, that, people like them won't be heard. And so all of this is to the benefit of Republicans. But, we do have a lawsuit in Georgia challenging what's going on there. We have a very energized group of Democrats who are working very hard to get members of non-white groups out to the polls. And so I think, we shouldn't tell people that this voter suppression effort is going to be fatal. Democrats might be able to overcome it.
It doesn't matter who you are, what party you belong to, or what country you're in. Your goal must never be to stop people to vote. It should be to get more people to come out and vote. Guys, thanks very much. Daniel Dale and Jason Johnson. Great talking to you. Tonight's last word is still ahead, but we want to know your thoughts about the 2018 midterm elections. Are you excited about potential change? Have you got opinions on candidates running in your district? If you've got something that you want to get off your chest about the midterms, share it at electionconfessions.com. Time for tonight's last word.
Trump met Kanye in the Oval Office. Really? Don't you have better things to do? And by the way, when I say that, I'm really not sure which of you I'm talking to. The only place those two should meet is in group. They should be in the basement of a church, and a dude with an earring and a leather bracelet should be saying, "I'm so glad you both decided to come back." I mean, really.
You could tell a lot by how each of them prepared for the meeting. Kanye prepared by learning every fact in the world backwards, while Trump prepared by clearing his desk of any valuables.
That's tonight's last word.
Hey, it's Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Every day I come to the office and we make a television show. And every day I think to myself, there's so much more I want to talk about. And so this is our podcast. It's called Why Is This Happening? And the whole idea behind it is to get to the root of the things that we see play out every day. They're driven by big ideas. Each week, I sit down with a person uniquely suited to explain why this is happening.
New episodes of Why Is This Happening? Every Tuesday. Listen for free wherever you get your podcasts.